My name is Margaret, and this Thanksgiving I'm serving something special, the deed to the family home that was supposed to be mine. But let me start from the beginning, when my world came crashing down just 3 months ago, and how a family's greed taught me that sometimes the dead protect us better than the living ever could. David and I had been married for 15 years when cancer took him from me. We'd built our life in this beautiful Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts, a house that had been in his family for generations, with its wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and the stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across our living room every morning. During those final weeks in the hospital, David held my hand with what little strength he had left and promised me I'd always have a home. "The house is yours, Maggie," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the machines keeping him alive. "Don't let anyone tell you different. You belong there more than anyone." Those words sustained me through the funeral arrangements, through the endless stream of casseroles from neighbors, through the sleepless nights when I'd wake up expecting to find him beside me. I thought his family understood. They'd seemed supportive during the funeral, helping with arrangements, bringing flowers, telling everyone what a wonderful wife I'd been to David. How naive I was to believe their performance. What I didn't know was that his family had other plans brewing behind their masks of grief. The morning after the funeral, while I was still in my black dress from the service, still wearing the pearl necklace David had given me for our 10th anniversary, his brother, Richard, knocked on my door. Behind him stood his wife, Patricia, a woman who'd always looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe, their 2 teenage sons who avoided eye contact, and David's elderly mother, Eleanor, whose disapproval of me had been a constant undercurrent in our marriage. They filed into my living room like a jury delivering a verdict, their faces set with grim determination. The morning light streaming through those stained glass windows seemed to mock the darkness they brought with them. "Margaret, we need to talk about the house," Richard said, settling into David's favorite armchair as if he already owned it, his expensive suit a stark contrast to my grief-wrinkled dress. Eleanor, who'd never liked me from the moment David first brought me home, sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, her lips pursed in the disapproval I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "This house has been in the family for 4 generations. David may have married you, but you're not blood. You don't understand what this place means to us." I felt my knees go weak, my coffee cup trembling in my hands. David left the house to me in his will. We discussed this extensively during his illness. He wanted me to. "That will was written when David was heavily medicated," Patricia interrupted, her voice dripping with false sympathy while her eyes remained cold as winter stone. "He wasn't thinking clearly about the family legacy, about what's really best for everyone. Besides, what does a woman your age need with such a large house? You have no children, no real connection to this family's history? It's not practical." The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to wound. At 45, after losing my husband and facing a future alone, I was being told I didn't deserve the home we'd shared, the home where we'd planned to grow old together, where every room held memories of our life together. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice cold as the October wind rattling the windows. "We've already consulted with our lawyer, dear. There are ways to contest these things, especially when someone might have influenced a dying man's decisions." An accusation hung in the air like poison gas. They were suggesting I'd manipulated David, that our 15-year marriage meant nothing, that my grief was somehow less valid than theirs because I wasn't born into their bloodline. Richard leaned forward, his smile predatory, his tone taking on the false reasonableness of a used car salesman. "But we're reasonable people, Margaret. We don't want to drag this through the courts, put everyone through that kind of stress. We're prepared to offer you a settlement, enough to buy a nice little condo somewhere, maybe closer to whatever family you have left. You could start fresh, make a clean break from all these painful memories." I looked around the room where David and I had celebrated 15 Christmases, where we'd hosted dinner parties for our friends, where we'd dreamed of the future we'd never have. Every corner held a memory. every piece of furniture told our story. The bookshelf filled with novels we'd read together, the piano where David had played while I cooked Sunday dinners, the family photos that now included me in their frames. This wasn't just a house. It was the sanctuary David had promised would always be mine. "I need time to think," I managed to say, my voice stronger than I felt, though inside I was crumbling like autumn leaves. "Of course," Richard said, standing, up with the satisfaction of someone who believed he'd already won. "Take all the time you need, but remember, Thanksgiving is next week. It would be nice if we could resolve this by then. Have everything settled before the holidays. After all, this house has always hosted the family gathering. It would be such a shame to break that tradition." As they filed out, Eleanor paused at the door, her final words delivered with surgical precision. "You know, dear, David always said you were too emotional, too dramatic for your own good. Perhaps it's time to be practical for once. Think about what's really best for everyone instead of clinging to fantasies." The door closed behind them, leaving me alone in the sudden silence that felt heavier than David's absence ever had. I sank into David's chair, still warm from Richard's presence, and for the first time since the funeral, I cried. But somewhere between the tears and the rage, between the grief and the humiliation, something hardened inside me, like steel forged in fire. They wanted to take my home, my memories, my future. They thought I was just an emotional woman who would fold under pressure, sign their papers, and disappear quietly into whatever small life they deemed appropriate for someone like me. They were about to learn just how wrong they were about the woman David had loved enough to protect, even from the grave. Tell me, where are you watching this story unfold from? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the dramatic continuation, because what I discovered next changed everything and proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply the truth. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching the storm brewing inside me. But for the first time since David's death, I woke with purpose instead of just pain. I called David's longtime friend and lawyer, James Morrison, before I'd even had my first cup of coffee. We'd known each other for years through dinner parties and holiday gatherings, and I trusted him implicitly. When I explained what had happened, describing every humiliating detail of Richard's visit, the silence on the other end of the line lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Margaret," he finally said, his voice carefully controlled in. That way lawyers have when they're trying not to let emotion cloud their judgment. "There's something you need to know. Something David made me promise not to tell you, unless his family tried exactly what you're describing. He predicted this would happen." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What do you mean he predicted this?" "David didn't just leave you the house, Margaret. 3 months before he died, when his treatment wasn't going well and he knew he might not have much time left, he came to my office with documents that would make you not just a homeowner, but a very wealthy woman. He was planning to tell you, after his treatment was complete, wanted to surprise you with security for your future together. But he also wanted to prepare for the possibility that he wouldn't survive to protect you himself. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, my free hand shaking as I poured coffee I no longer wanted. "What kind of documents?" "Land development rights. That Victorian house you're sitting in, the house his family thinks they can steal from you, sits on property that's been designated for a major commercial development. The city approved it last year, but the project was kept quiet to prevent speculation and price manipulation. Your house and the 3 adjacent properties are worth approximately $12 million to the development company. David knew this because he'd been researching property values and development plans for months." The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the kitchen floor in a spray of ceramic and hot liquid that seemed to mirror my own shattered world, reassembling into something entirely new. $12 million? "David set up a trust in your name, Margaret. He wanted to ensure you'd be financially secure for the rest of your life, but also that you'd have the power to make decisions about the family legacy on your own terms." You don't just own the house. You own the decision about whether that entire block gets developed or preserved. You have veto power over any development plans, and if you approve development, you get the full 12 million plus ongoing royalties. The irony was staggering, almost poetic in its justice. Richard and his family weren't just trying to steal my home, they were trying to steal a fortune they didn't even know existed, a fortune that would have secured not just my future, but the future of everyone in our neighborhood who was struggling with rising costs and gentrification pressures. But there's more, James continued, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. I've been doing some research since your call yesterday, making some discreet inquiries. Richard borrowed heavily against his business last year, using his expected inheritance as collateral. He owes approximately $2 million to various creditors, and his construction business is failing. He needs that house, Margaret. He's been counting on selling it to pay his debts, and he's in debt up to his eyeballs. I felt a cold smile spread across my face, the kind of smile David used to get when he was working out a particularly complex problem at his engineering firm. David had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone, always thinking, always planning, always protecting the people he loved. Even in death, he was protecting me from wolves who wore the masks of family. What do I need to do? I asked, already feeling stronger than I had since his diagnosis. Nothing yet. Let them make their move. David was very specific about his instructions. He said if his family ever tried to contest the will or pressure you into signing anything, I should let them dig their own grave first. He wanted them to reveal their true character before you revealed your true strength. That evening, as I sat in our living room surrounded by the memories Richard wanted to steal, my phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering, savoring the moment. Margaret. His voice was different now, more aggressive, less polite, tinged with the desperation of a man whose carefully laid plans were taking too long to bear fruit. We've been patient, but this needs to be resolved. Our mother is elderly, and this stress isn't good for her health. Patricia's been losing sleep, and the boys are asking questions about their inheritance. We're prepared to go to court if necessary, and I promise you, that won't be pleasant for anyone involved. The threat was clear, but instead of the fear he expected, I felt only calm determination. I understand your position, Richard, and I've been thinking about what you said. You're right, this should be resolved quickly. Why don't we discuss this properly? Come to Thanksgiving dinner. Bring the whole family. We'll settle this once and for all, like family should. There was a pause, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. You're cooking Thanksgiving dinner? At the house? Oh yes, I said, my voice sweet as poisoned honey, channeling every ounce of the Southern charm my grandmother had taught me before she died. I'm preparing something very special, something that will give everyone exactly what they deserve. Something that will be remembered for years to come. After I hung up, I looked around my kitchen, David's kitchen, our kitchen, and began planning the most important meal of my life. They wanted to take everything from me because they thought I was powerless, just a grieving widow with no family, no support, no fight left in her. They saw me as an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved, a woman too emotional and dramatic to understand what was really best. They were about to discover that the woman they'd underestimated had learned a few things about power from the man who'd loved her enough to protect her even from the grave. This Thanksgiving, I wasn't just cooking dinner, I was serving justice, and it was going to be a feast they'd never forget, and it was going to be absolutely delicious. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of November sky that promised snow, matching the storm brewing inside me that had been building for weeks. I'd spent every day since Richard's call preparing meticulously, not just the meal, but the revelation that would change everything. The turkey was in the oven, the side dishes were prepared with the same attention to detail I'd always brought to our family gatherings. But this time, every element was choreographed for maximum impact. James Morrison arrived first at 11 o'clock. carrying a briefcase and wearing the same somber expression he'd worn at David's funeral. His usually cheerful demeanor was replaced by the gravity of what we were about to do. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" he asked, settling the legal documents on the dining room table where David and I had shared thousands of meals. "Once we do this, there's no going back. They'll never forgive you for what you're about to reveal." They made their choice when they decided I didn't deserve the home David left me, I replied, adjusting the centerpiece, autumn leaves and chrysanthemums from the garden David had planted for me 3 years ago. "I'm simply giving them the consequences of that choice. Besides, forgiveness is overrated when it comes to people who mistake kindness for weakness." The dining room looked perfect, exactly as it had for every Thanksgiving during my marriage, except for the manila folders James had placed beside each plate. The good china was out, the crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and the table was set for 8, the same number we'd had for years when David was alive, and his family still pretended to accept me. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, punctual as always. Richard, Patricia, Eleanor, and their twin sons, now 17 and uncomfortable in their dress clothes, filed in, bringing with them an air of barely concealed triumph and the kind of false warmth people wear when they think they're about to get everything they want. Eleanor surveyed the dining room with the proprietary gaze of someone who believed she was reclaiming stolen territory, her eyes cataloging every piece of furniture, every family photo, every element of the home she'd decided should never have been mine in the first place. "Margaret, dear," she said, her voice dripping false warmth that fooled no one, "you've outdone yourself. The table looks lovely, though I suppose this might be the last Thanksgiving dinner you'll be hosting here. We should make it memorable." "Oh, Eleanor," I replied, guiding them to their seats with the grace of a hostess who knew exactly what was coming. "I have a feeling this will be a Thanksgiving none of us will ever forget. In fact, I guarantee it." Patricia had brought a folder, their legal documents no doubt, and she placed it conspicuously beside her plate like a weapon waiting to be deployed. I noticed her hands were manicured to perfection, her jewelry expensive, her outfit carefully chosen to project success and authority. She wanted me to see what I'd be giving up, what I'd never be able to afford on my own. Richard carved the turkey with unnecessary aggression, as if he were carving up my resistance. Along with the bird, his knife work sharp and decisive. The twins shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sensing the tension but not understanding its source, occasionally glancing at each other with the kind of worried looks teenagers get when adults are about to ruin everything. "Margaret," Richard said as we began eating, his fork cutting through sweet potato casserole with the same precision he probably used to cut through business deals. "We've brought the paperwork we discussed. Our lawyer has prepared a very generous settlement offer. More generous than we probably should be, given the circumstances. You could be out by Christmas, start the new year fresh somewhere more appropriate for a single woman your age." Their teenage sons continued to shift uncomfortably, and I felt a genuine pang of sympathy for them. They were about to learn some very harsh truths about their parents, about family loyalty, about what people will do when money is involved. These boys had grown up thinking their Uncle David was a generous man who'd married a nice woman, never knowing that their parents saw that nice woman as an obstacle to their financial security. "Before we discuss any paperwork," I said, standing gracefully and smoothing my black dress, the same one I'd worn to David's funeral, chosen deliberately for its symbolism, "I have a few things to share with everyone. James?" Morrison stood, opening his briefcase with the deliberate care of a man who'd done this many times before, though never in circumstances quite like these. Eleanor's fork froze halfway to her mouth, gravy dripping back onto her plate. "Who is this man? Margaret, what is this about?" "This is James Morrison, David's attorney and oldest friend. He has some information about David's will that might interest you. Information that David specifically asked him to share if anyone in the family ever tried to pressure me into giving up my home." Richard's face flushed red, the color creeping up from his collar like rising water. We've already established that. David wasn't competent when he wrote that will. Our lawyer has assured us. Your lawyer, James interrupted smoothly, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years of legal practice, is about to become very expensive and probably very embarrassed. You see, David's will is not only ironclad, it was prepared with extraordinary care. He was examined by 3 independent physicians before signing it, all of whom certified his complete mental competency. But more importantly, the will is just the beginning of what David left Margaret. He placed a document in front of each family member with the ceremonial gravity of a judge delivering a sentence. David didn't just leave Margaret the house. He left her something much more valuable: the development rights to this entire block. The property you're sitting on, the property you're trying to steal from her, is worth $12 million to Meridian Development Corporation. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Eleanor's fork clattering onto her plate and the twins' sharp intake of breath. Patricia's face had gone chalk white, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her pale skin. Richard stared at the papers as if they might burst into flames, his confident expression crumbling like a house of cards in a windstorm. "That's impossible," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "David would have told us. He wouldn't have kept something like this secret." "I'm afraid it's not only possible, it's documented and legally binding," James continued, enjoying this more than his professional demeanor would normally allow. David spent months researching the development plans. He knew exactly what this property was worth, and he knew exactly what his family would try to do to Margaret after his death. He prepared for this possibility with the thoroughness that characterized everything he did in life. I watched the realization dawn on their faces, not just that they'd lost a house, but that they'd lost a fortune that could have supported them for generations. The greed that had driven them to try to steal from a grieving widow had cost them more than they could have imagined. Richard's hands were shaking as he read the legal documents, his construction worker's fingers struggling with the complex legal language that spelled out his complete and utter defeat. "But there's more," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, feeling David's presence in the room like a warm hand on my shoulder. "Richard, would you like to tell everyone about the loans you took against your expected inheritance? Or shall James explain how you've been counting on this house to save your failing business and pay off your mounting debts?" The turkey grew cold as the truth filled the room like smoke from a fire, and David's family was finally seeing the man they thought they knew, and the woman they'd completely underestimated. "This isn't over," Richard said, standing abruptly. His chair scraping against the hardwood floor David had refinished with his own hands. "We'll fight this. We'll—" "Actually," I replied, lifting my wine glass in a mock toast, "it is over. It was over the moment you decided to treat me like an intruder in my own home, but please, finish your dinner. After all, this might be the last meal you can afford for quite a while." Don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because the next chapter reveals the shocking family secret that changes everything we thought we knew about David's death and the true depth of Richard's betrayal. After the family stormed out, leaving their legal documents scattered across my dining table like fallen leaves, James and I sat in the sudden quiet of my kitchen. The untouched pumpkin pie seemed to mock the chaos that had just unfolded. "There's something else, isn't there?" I asked, reading the expression on James's face. "Something you haven't told me yet." He nodded slowly, pulling out another folder from his briefcase. "David gave me strict instructions not to reveal this unless his family tried to contest the will aggressively. After what just happened, I think we've reached that point." My stomach clenched. "What is it?" "Margaret. David didn't just know about the development deal. He was the one who facilitated it. For the past 2 years, he'd been working secretly with the City Planning Commission to ensure that when the development happened, it would include affordable housing units and community spaces. He was trying to balance progress with preservation." I stared at him. David never mentioned any of this to me. because he was protecting you from something else. Richard wasn't just borrowing against his inheritance. He was involved in a scheme to fast-track the development without the affordable housing requirements. He and a group of investors wanted to bulldoze this entire historic district and build luxury condos. The room felt like it was spinning. Richard was planning to destroy the neighborhood? Not just planning. He'd already started. David discovered that Richard had been bribing city officials to overlook environmental impact studies and community input requirements. David spent his last months gathering evidence of the corruption. James handed me a thick manila envelope. This contains everything: bank records, recorded phone calls, email exchanges. David was preparing to expose the entire scheme when his cancer got worse. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were documents that painted a picture of systematic corruption involving Richard, several city council members, and Meridian Development Corporation. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. "James," I whispered, staring at a medical report. "This says David's cancer was caused by environmental toxins, the same toxins found in illegal dumping near the construction sites Richard was promoting." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. James's face was grave. David suspected as much. He believed his illness wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of Richard's carelessness with environmental regulations at previous development sites. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and consuming. Richard hadn't just tried to steal my home and my future. His greed might have cost David his life. The man I'd loved, who died in my arms promising me everything would be okay, had been fighting not just cancer, but the betrayal of his own brother. Why didn't David go to the police? While he was alive? He tried. But Richard had connections, and David was getting sicker. He realized he needed to build an airtight case, something that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. He was leaving that fight to you, Margaret. He believed you were strong enough to finish what he started. I thought about David in those final weeks, how he'd squeeze my hand and tell me I was tougher than I knew, how he'd made me promise to never let anyone make me feel small or powerless. He hadn't just been talking about grief. He'd been preparing me for war. "There's one more thing," James said quietly. "The development deal? David structured it so that you have the right to approve or reject any plans. If you wanted to, you could expose Richard's corruption, stop the development entirely, and preserve this neighborhood exactly as it is." I looked around my kitchen, at the table where David and I had shared thousands of meals, at the window where he'd stood watching birds at the feeder he'd built. This house, this neighborhood, this life we'd created together. It was all under threat, not from strangers, but from the family that should have protected it. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "This isn't over. We'll fight this in court. Drag your name through the mud. You'll regret humiliating us." I showed the message to James, who shook his head grimly. "They still don't understand what they're up against." "No," I said, feeling something fierce and determined crystallizing in my chest. "They don't, but they're about to learn." As I looked out at the November darkness gathering outside my window, I realized that David hadn't just left me a house and money. He'd left me a mission. The power to stop corruption, to protect a community, to ensure that his death meant something. The war Richard wanted was about to begin, but he'd made one fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed I was just a grieving widow with no fight left in her. He'd forgotten that I was David's wife, and David never backed down from a fight worth fighting. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since David's death. I knew exactly what I had to do. But first, I needed allies, and I knew exactly where to find them. I started with Mrs. Chen, who lived next door and had watched the neighborhood change over her 40 years here. When I knocked on her door with James's folder in hand, she welcomed me with the warmth she'd always shown David and me. "Margaret, dear, you look different," she said, pouring tea in her spotless kitchen. stronger somehow. Mrs. Chen, what would you say if I told you that someone was planning to tear down our entire block and put up luxury condos with no regard for the families who've lived here for generations? Her face darkened. I'd say they'd have to go through me first. This is our home, our community. My children grew up playing with the Rodriguez kids from 2 houses down. Mr. Patterson taught half the neighborhood boys how to fix cars in his garage. I spread the documents across her table. Richard, David's brother, is part of a group trying to do exactly that. But David left me the power to stop them. As Mrs. Chen read through the evidence of corruption, her expression shifted, from shock to anger to determination. What do you need from me? Help organizing the neighborhood. If we're going to fight this, we need everyone to understand what's at stake. Within 2 hours, Mrs. Chen had called half the block. By evening, my living room was packed with neighbors. I'd known for years, but had never really talked to about anything deeper than weather or holiday decorations. The Rodriguez family sat next to the elderly Mr. Patterson. The young couple with twin babies who'd moved in last year looked overwhelmed but determined. This is our neighborhood, I told them, standing where Richard had sat just days before, trying to intimidate me into giving up my home. These developers don't just want to build luxury condos. They want to erase our history, displace working families, and destroy the community character that makes this place special. I showed them the environmental reports, the evidence of corruption, the plans that would have eliminated the small businesses along our commercial street. But we have something they don't expect: each other and the legal right to stop them. Maria Rodriguez raised her hand. What about the people? Who can't afford to fight? My sister works 2 jobs just to pay rent. If they develop this area and property values skyrocket, that's exactly why David structured the development rights the way he did, James explained. If any development happens, it has to include affordable housing units and community spaces. But Margaret has the right to reject any plan that doesn't serve the neighborhood's interests. The room buzzed with conversation as neighbors realized they weren't powerless. Mr. Patterson, who'd been silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. I've lived here 60 years, seen this neighborhood survive urban renewal in the 70s, gentrification in the 90s. We've always found a way to stick together. But this time is different, I said. This time we have more than just determination. We have documentation, legal standing, and the resources to fight back properly. That's when I told them about the $12 million, about my intention to use David's legacy not just to preserve our neighborhood, but to make it stronger. Community gardens in vacant lots, a neighborhood resource center, small business loans for local entrepreneurs. David believed in this place, I said, feeling his presence in the room with us. He died trying to protect it. Now it's up to us to finish what he started. As neighbors filed out into the night, making plans for community meetings and strategy sessions, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death: hope. Not just for myself, but for something larger than my personal grief. My phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. Margaret. His voice was tight with barely controlled rage. You've made a serious mistake involving the neighbors. This is between family. No, Richard, I said, looking out my window at the street where children played and families had built lives for generations. This stopped being about family the moment you decided my home wasn't really mine. Now it's about community, about justice, and about making sure David's death meant something. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret, I replied, is that David isn't here to see his own brother get exactly what he deserves. Like this video and subscribe if you're ready to see how this neighborhood fights back. Because tomorrow, we take the battle to City Hall. 6 months later, I stood in the same kitchen where this story began, but everything had changed. Through my window, I could see children playing in the new community garden where a vacant lot used to collect trash. The corner store that had been struggling was now thriving, thanks to the small business development fund we'd established with part of David's legacy. The legal battle had been swift and decisive. Once the FBI investigated James's evidence of corruption, Richard and his conspirators faced federal charges. The city council members involved were removed from office. Meridian Development Corporation's executives were facing prison time for bribery and environmental violations. Richard never went to trial. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of federal prison, he accepted a plea deal that included full restitution to the community and a permanent ban from any development work in Massachusetts. His business collapsed, his assets were seized, and Eleanor, his mother, who'd called me dramatic and emotional, moved to Florida to live with her sister. But the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was what we'd built together. I walked through the neighborhood that evening, as I did every day now, watching families gathering on porches, young parents pushing strollers, teenagers who had after-school jobs at the new community center David's money had funded. Mrs. Chen waved from her garden where she was teaching the Rodriguez twins how to plant tomatoes. The development did happen, but on our terms. We preserved the historic Victorian houses while adding thoughtfully designed, affordable housing. The commercial district expanded to include a cooperative market, a community health clinic, and spaces for local artists and small businesses. Property values rose, but longtime residents weren't displaced. The community land trust we established ensured they could stay. At the community center, a plaque read, "In memory of David Harrison, who believed that true wealth is measured not in what we accumulate, but in what we protect for future generations." That evening, I sat in David's chair, my chair now, reading a letter from a young family who'd just moved into one of the new affordable housing units. They thanked me for proving that one person could make a difference, that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win. But I knew the truth. It hadn't been one person. It had been a community that decided to fight for itself. Neighbors who chose to stand together instead of being divided by fear and greed. I'd just been the catalyst, the spark that David had prepared and positioned to ignite something larger. My phone rang. James, calling with news that always made me smile. "Margaret, you'll never guess. The environmental cleanup from the illegal dumping sites has been completed ahead of schedule, and the EPA wants to use our neighborhood as a model for community-led environmental justice initiatives." "David would be proud," I said, and I meant it. He'd died believing that love was stronger than greed, that community was more powerful than corruption. He'd been right. As I hung up, I realized that grief had transformed into something else, not the absence of David, but the presence of his values living on through actions. The house wasn't just a building anymore. It was the headquarters of a movement. The $12 million wasn't just money. It was the foundation of a community's future. Richard had tried to take my home because he saw me as powerless, alone, emotional. He'd been wrong about the powerless part, wrong about the alone part, but right about the emotional part. I was emotional about justice, about community, about making sure that David's love and sacrifice created something beautiful in the world. That night, as I turned off the lights in the house David had promised would always be mine, I whispered to him what I whispered every night. "We did it, sweetheart. We won." And in the quiet of our home, the home that was now the heart of a thriving, protected community, I could almost hear him whisper back, "I always knew you would." The story that began with loss had become a story of victory. Not just my victory, but the victory of everyone who believed that ordinary people, when they stand together, can defeat any force that tries to destroy what they love. Thank you for following this incredible journey with me. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories of courage, community, and justice. What story of standing up for what's right would you like to hear next?